When my stepmother raised a glass and called me the practice daughter, in front of 60 guests at my younger half-sister's rehearsal dinner, I took off my mother's blue apron, laid it across the dessert table, and every server in the room stopped moving. My father was sitting beside her, smiling as if the joke were harmless, even though he had just announced that his share of the cafe I had run for 9 years would be handed to Olivia as a wedding gift. The guests laughed because they thought I was part of the entertainment. Denise stopped laughing because she knew one thing they did not. Nobody in that building knew how to make the kitchen move without me, and no ownership transfer could happen without my signature. That night did not begin with the toast. It began 8 weeks earlier, on a Monday morning, when my father called before sunrise and said, "Lena, I need my steady girl." That was his phrase for me whenever he wanted a favor too large to name. I was 32, old enough to recognize the hook, and still trained enough to feel it catch. Dad owned Red Maple Café in Cedar Falls, the place my mother, Ruth, had opened with him before she died. I had worked there since I could reach the register. After college, I came back for one summer because Denise was recovering from surgery. 11-year-old Olivia needed rides and meals, and Dad said the cafe could not survive without an extra pair of hands. That summer became 9 years. "Denise has a migraine," Dad said. "Olivia's flight lands at 10. Can you open, bake, handle payroll, and make the welcome dinner tonight?" He said it as if he were asking me to pick up milk. I was already standing in the kitchen with flour on my wrists and an oven timer screaming. 2 line cooks had quit in the same week. The freezer had failed overnight, and the credit card machine was down. "I can open and bake," I said. "I can't invent 3 more people." He went quiet, then used the softer voice. "You know your sister only comes home once in a while. I want this visit to feel easy." Olivia was not cruel when we were children. That made everything harder. She was 12 years younger than me, bright and pretty and trained by Denise to enter every room as if the room had been waiting. When she was 11, I packed her lunches, drove her to dance lessons, and signed school forms because Denise said recovery had hit her nervous system hard. When Olivia cried, Dad looked at me like I was the nearest adult, even when I was barely old enough to understand the bills on our kitchen table. If I complained, Denise said, "You're so mature. Don't make your father choose between old grief and new joy." That sentence kept me quiet for years. I opened the cafe. I threw out ruined berries, remade the scone dough, and wrote the lunch specials on the board. Henry, our oldest cook, arrived limping and carrying his own knives because he did not trust the new dishwasher not to chip them. Henry had worked for my mother. He did not waste words. He looked at the reservation book, and then at me. "They coming back for good?" He meant Olivia and her fiancé, Blake. "Just a visit," Henry snorted. "People don't fly home on a Monday with a fiancé and 4 suitcases because they want pancakes." At 10:30, Denise walked in wearing sunglasses and no migraine. Olivia followed with Blake, a camera-ready man who hugged my father before he hugged me. Denise kissed the air near my cheek, looked at the packed counter, and said, "Oh good, you kept it running." "Not thank you." Not I know it was hard. Just a statement, as if the lights had stayed on by themselves. Olivia hugged me quickly. "Lena, this place is so cute now. It has so much potential." I nearly laughed. Potential was what people said when they wanted credit for something that already existed. Dad clapped his hands and told everyone to gather near the pastry case. Henry stayed by the grill. Maria, one of our part-time servers, came out wiping her hands on a towel. Dad put one arm around Olivia and the other around Denise. I remained behind the counter, still holding the payroll envelope. "We have news," Dad said. Olivia lifted her left hand. The ring was enormous. Everyone cheered. I cheered too, because the first stab had not arrived yet. Then Denise said, "And we've decided the rehearsal dinner will be here. Full family circle." She smiled at me. "Lena, you'll handle the food, staff, flowers, rentals, and all that behind-the-scenes magic you do." I was being asked to build a celebration around a decision no one had discussed with me. "We can talk about the budget after lunch," I said. Denise laughed too quickly. "Oh honey, no need to make it cold." Blake put his hand on Olivia's back. "We're investing in the brand after the wedding, so think of this as a launch." That word changed the air. Launch meant they had plans I had not seen. Dad avoided my eyes and picked a crumb off the counter. I asked him to step into the pantry. I did not yell. I had learned young that if I became loud, Denise could make my volume the problem. What does Blake mean by investing? Dad rubbed his forehead. Nothing is final. That isn't an answer. He sighed as though I had trapped him. Olivia has ideas. Social media, private events, a dinner club. She and Blake could bring energy. I bring payroll, vendors, staff, taxes, repairs, breakfast rush, lunch rush, and the dinner club you tried to cancel twice. Don't keep score, Lena. That was how my father protected himself. He called facts a scoreboard, boundaries, bitterness, and memory a bad habit. Then he softened again. This place carries grief for me. Denise thinks a new chapter could help. Through the pantry doorway, I saw Denise rearranging muffins I had already arranged. She was not grieving my mother. She was measuring shelf space. Where do I fit in this new chapter? Dad touched my shoulder. You're the backbone. You always have been. It sounded like praise until I heard the trap inside it. A backbone supports the body. Dares. It does not get a face, a name on the sign, or a vote about where the body goes. Before I could answer, Olivia called from the front. Dad, can we show Blake Ruth's apron? My mother's apron hung on a brass hook beside the office door. It was faded blue cotton with a crooked maple leaf stitched near the pocket. She had sewn the leaf herself after the first health inspector said the cafe needed a more professional look. My mother thought handmade was more honest than professional. I wore that apron only on the hardest days. Staff knew not to touch it. Customers who remembered Ruth smiled whenever they saw it. Denise lifted it from the hook before I reached her. This would be perfect for Olivia's photos. Something old, something local. I held out my hand. That stays here. Olivia's smile flickered. Blake watched as if he were learning where the weak boards were. Dad said, Lena, it's just for pictures. It was my mother's. Denise tilted her head, gentle enough for an audience. And Olivia is part of this family too. Don't punish her for being born after a tragedy. Then she turned away from me, carried the apron into the kitchen, and tied the first knot around Olivia's waist before I could cross the room. Denise had my mother's blue apron tied around Olivia before I reached the prep table, and the photographer was already telling her to look like the woman who built this place. My hand stopped against the counter. Olivia smiled because she did not understand what had been taken from me. Denise smiled because she did. Dad stood near the office door with his coffee, pretending the scene was harmless, the way he always did when the harm made his life easier. Take it off, I said. The kitchen went quiet, except for the freezer motor coughing behind me. Denise tilted her head as though I had raised my voice in church. Lena, don't start. It's one picture. Blake glanced toward the dining room, measuring the place as though he were deciding which parts could be sold as charm. Olivia touched the crooked maple leaf and finally looked at me. I didn't know, she said, but she did not untie it. Dad moved between us without really stepping between us. Honey, we need this morning to go smoothly. Smoothly meant I swallowed it. Smoothly meant Denise received the pretty version, Olivia received the future, and I received the early shift. Henry pushed through the swinging door with a pan in his hand. If she's wearing Ruth's apron, ask her what goes in Ruth's winter soup. Nobody laughed. Olivia's face changed. Denise said, We are not doing trivia. Henry set the pan down hard enough to make the lids jump. Not trivia. The soup is on today's board. If she's the story, she should know the story. Blake stepped in with his soft business voice. We're not selling recipes today, we're selling continuity. He said continuity as though it were something he could order from a printer. I reached behind Olivia's neck and untied the apron before anyone could make another speech. I did not yank it or give Denise a scene she could use later. I folded it once against my chest. Use the Red House apron. If this is about continuity, don't dress her in a lie. The photographer lowered his camera. Maria turned away, but I saw her smile before she hit it. For half a second, Denise had no clean way to make me look unreasonable. Then Dad chose. Put it back, Lena. 4 words, and the entire kitchen understood the real order. This was no longer about an apron. It was about whether I still had the right to say my mother's name without permission. Olivia whispered, Dad, maybe we can just… Denise cut her off. Your sister is emotional. Brides should not be punished for other people's grief. If Olivia wants to wear Ruth's apron, Olivia can ask me. Not you. That sentence gave Olivia a door and a cost. Her eyes dropped to the apron, and for the first time that morning she looked less like a bride, and more like the little girl I used to lift onto the counter after school. Back then, she stole blueberries from the cooling rack, and asked whether Ruth had really made the first maple pie. I always told her yes because I wanted her to feel included. I did not know I was teaching everyone how easily I could be erased. Olivia spoke quietly. Can I wear it for one photo? I wanted to say no so badly my throat hurt. But the dining room was filling, the photographer was waiting, and Henry had 6 tickets on the line. One photo, then it goes back on the hook. Olivia nodded. The picture took less than 30 seconds. She stood beside the counter wearing my mother's apron and holding a tray of muffins I had baked before dawn. The photographer asked her to laugh. The laugh broke halfway because Henry called from the kitchen. Lena, grills backing up. Every customer in line turned toward me, not Olivia. It was not revenge. It was simply the truth moving through the room in work shoes. I returned the apron to its hook and went to the line. The morning should have ended there, with Denise embarrassed and me busy. Instead, Blake waited until the rush reached full speed to change the ground beneath my feet. He walked behind the counter with a legal pad and asked Maria how many tables she could handle if we removed breakfast plates and switched to bakery-forward service. People come here for eggs, Maria said. Blake wrote anyway. People can be taught new habits. I heard him from the grill and knew he was not talking only about customers. Dad let him continue. That told me more than an announcement would have. Blake opened the pastry case, pointed at Ruth's maple bars, and said, "These photograph well, but the margins are weak." Henry turned off one burner. He never killed heat during a rush unless he wanted everyone to hear the next thing. Blake looked at the dead burner. "Is there a problem?" "Only if you plan to run a cafe by calculator." Blake smiled, but the smile had teeth. "I plan to keep it alive." That was the story they were building. I was not being pushed aside because they were greedy. I was being replaced because I was sentimental, inefficient, and attached to the past. Denise wrapped the theft in family. Blake wrapped it in rescue. Dad stood between the two stories. Relieved he did not have to invent his own. He called me into the office. The payroll envelopes were still on the desk where I had left them. Dad shut the door but did not sit. "You embarrassed Olivia." Denise put Mom's apron on her for a branding photograph. He rubbed his forehead. "You hear yourself? Branding photograph. Apron. Soup. You're turning everything into a loyalty test." The payroll envelopes had my handwriting on them. The vendor slips carried my notes. The schedule on the wall was built around every crisis I had absorbed for 9 years. If loyalty had been a test, I had been taking it with no pencil and no end time. "Blake is helping us stabilize," Dad said. "Stabilize what?" His eyes moved toward the door. "Cash has been tight." Every cafe struggled. What frightened me was the shame in his voice, and how carefully he avoided my eyes. "How tight?" "Tight enough that I need you not fighting the people willing to help." They had not invited Blake in after deciding to celebrate Olivia. They had built the celebration around making him look necessary. "Why didn't you tell me?" Dad's face hardened. "Because you make everything personal." He had hidden the danger from the person running the cafe, and turned my shock into a personality flaw. Denise opened the office door without knocking. "The photographer needs a kitchen action shot. Lena can stand in the background if she wants." She looked at me. It might help her feel included. Dad did not correct her. Something inside me shifted, quietly enough that neither of them heard it. "I have a lunch rush. Use whoever the new face is." I walked past her. The dining room was packed. Maria was trapped between customers and Blake's questions. Olivia had changed into a plain red apron, but she held the order pad upside down. A man at table 6 called for coffee. A tuller spilled orange juice. The card machine froze again. Blake said, loudly enough for 3 tables to hear. "This is exactly why the model needs to change." He wanted the mess to prove his point. I stopped saving the room silently. I rang the bell twice, the way Ruth used to when the kitchen needed everyone's ears. "We're switching to counter numbers for 10 minutes. Maria, coffee and payments only. Olivia, water and silverware. Blake, if you're behind the counter, wash your hands and run plates or step out." The room moved because it knew my voice. Even Blake took one step toward the sink before he caught himself. A woman near the register said, "Thank you, Lena." Another regular lifted his mug. "She's the reason we come in." Denise heard it from beside the pastry case. Her expression barely changed, but her plan did. She stopped trying to borrow Ruth's history and started looking for a way to make my competence seem like defiance. By 2 o'clock, the rush had passed. Olivia found me at the back sink scraping burned egg from a pan. I really didn't know about the money. I believed her, which made it worse. Do you know what they're planning for the cafe? Dad said we were all going to figure out roles after the wedding. She swallowed. Blake says you might want freedom too. Did anyone ask me what I wanted? Olivia did not answer. Before leaving, she placed a small brass pin on the prep table. It was shaped like a maple leaf, the one Ruth used to wear on the apron strap before the clasp broke. Denise had this in her makeup bag. She said the apron looked cleaner without it, but I thought you should have it. She walked out before I could decide whether to thank her or ask why she had waited. Henry entered from the alley carrying onions. He saw the pin and stopped. Ruth hated that thing, he said it poked her collarbone. Then why did she keep wearing it? Henry put down the crate. Because when that leaf went on, everybody knew she had already decided what she would not surrender. On the floor, it meant no backdoor changes. Your father knows what it meant on paper. He looked toward the office, then back at me. Ask Arthur about the agreement he promised Ruth he would never lose. The next morning, the bread driver parked at our back door and said he could not unload a single tray unless I paid him in cash. He would not even step inside. He stood with his clipboard beneath his arm, looking embarrassed for me, while dozens of customers were about to arrive expecting toast, sandwiches, and the cinnamon rolls Ruth used to start before sunrise. I'm sorry, Lena, Pete said. Red Maple is on hold until the overdue balance is handled. That was the first time the cafe's trouble stopped being a whispered family secret and became a locked truck full of bread I could not touch. I had $43 in my wallet, a registered drawer that had not been counted, and Henry behind me cracking eggs onto the grill. Maria came through the kitchen door tying her apron and froze when she saw Pete outside. How much releases today's order? He named a number that made Henry turn off one burner. That small click told me more than Dad had told me in a year. We were not behind in a normal way. We were close enough to the edge that breakfast could fail before the doors opened. I called Dad. Denise answered his phone. Your father is resting. Blake is handling vendor relationships now. A vendor is refusing to unload our bread. Her voice lowered, not with fear, but satisfaction. Then perhaps people will finally see why we need fresh management. I heard Blake in the background. Where is Dad? Don't make a scene with working people. It reflects badly on all of us. She hung up. I opened the register, counted the night cash, and paid enough to release half the delivery. Pete hesitated before handing me the trays. For what it's worth, you're the only person here who ever called us before a storm. He was not taking sides. He had a route, a boss, and an unpaid balance. But he gave me the older loaves he was supposed to return. It was not proof of anything. In that moment, it was better. It was breakfast. By 9, I had rebuilt the menu around less bread, fewer pastries, and more eggs. That kind of math was not glamorous, but it kept people seated. Then Blake entered with Olivia and a woman carrying a folder and a smile that did not belong in a kitchen during a rush. Denise followed as though she were walking into a house she had already purchased. Blake looked at the smaller chalkboard menu. This is exactly the improvising we need to move away from. Improvising is why we opened today. The woman introduced herself as a brand consultant. Olivia's cheeks went pink before the introduction was finished, which told me she had known about the visit but not the timing. Blake opened the office using his own key. We'll stay out of your way if you keep service moving. Friendly on top, command underneath. Maria came to the pass window. Lena, are we taking instructions from them now? The kitchen waited for my answer. If I said yes, every employee who had survived on my schedules, shortcuts, and phone calls would start looking past me. If I said no, Blake would call me emotional and difficult. We serve customers first. Nobody changes the floor during breakfast. Maria nodded and went back out. Dad arrived at 10:30. He looked older, not because he had changed overnight, but because I was no longer helping him hide. He stood near the office while Blake discussed removing the old counter stools and replacing the Red Maple sign. Dad heard and did not stop him. I asked him to step into dry storage. How much do we owe? Lena, don't start. The bread truck almost left. His shoulders dropped. Winter was bad, then the equipment loan, then taxes. I thought I could catch up before anyone needed to know. Hiding had become kindness in his own memory. And Blake? He arranged an emergency bridge loan through his family's holding company. It keeps the bank from calling the full balance for now. For now? Dad stared at a flour sack. The agreement gives Blake limited operational authority if we miss certain payments. He can approve vendor spending, review the accounts, and recommend possession of secured equipment if we default. He could not simply own the cafe, but he could suffocate it long enough to make surrender look voluntary. What does Olivia have to do with it? Dad looked toward the office. Blake's company wants continuity before putting in more money. Olivia would be listed as the successor and added to the new management entity. On paper. He nodded. The cafe Ruth built and I carried was being reshaped so that my labor still mattered but my name did not. Dad reached for the old line. You're my steady girl. Help me get through this part. If I was steady, I stayed quiet. If I was hurt, I made things harder. If I asked for the truth, I upset him. I placed the brass pin on a flour sack. Henry says you know what this meant on paper. Dad stared at it as though it had spoken. Before he could answer, Denise opened the storage room door. Her smile vanished when she saw the pin. Where did you get that? Not the apron. Not the debt. The pin. I picked it up before she could touch it. Olivia found it. Denise recovered quickly. It belongs with the family things we're preparing for the launch. Dad still said nothing. Blake appeared behind her and took in the room with one glance. We don't have time for another emotional inventory. Then he offered me a place inside my own life. Stay through the transition. Train Olivia properly. We'll put you on a stable salary for 3 months while we modernize. After that, we evaluate. After 9 years of running the cafe, he was offering me a probation period. Dad looked at me with open pleading. Olivia stood behind Blake, staring at the pin instead of the consultant's folder. She was beginning to understand that the gift she had been offered required me to disappear politely. No changes during service, I said. Blake's smile remained, but his jaw moved. Service is not the business. Henry stepped into the hall, drying his hands. It is, if people came to eat. Blake looked at him as though a stove had spoken. Olivia finally said, Can we wait until after lunch? It was not rebellion, but it was the first time she had asked Blake to stop instead of asking me to understand. Blake turned toward her with the gentle voice he used on investors and frightened employees. This is how we save what your family loves. Olivia swallowed the sentence, but it did not go down clean. The lunch bell rang, and Maria called my name, because the first rush ticket had printed. I slid the pin into the coin pocket of my jeans. Henry set a plate in the window. Gail will be here for tomorrow's tasting. She knew Ruth before Denise did. Ask her why the leaf mattered. What about Dad's agreement? Henry pushed the plate toward table 6. Your mother never trusted courage without ink. The following afternoon, Denise stopped trying to borrow my mother's history in private. Instead, she handed me a microphone in front of Blake's lenders, consultants, and invited guests and told me to bless the takeover myself. The cafe had closed early for a future menu tasting, but every table was full. Dad stood beside the register with his jaw tight. Olivia remained near the pastry case, wearing the red house apron, not Ruth's blue one. The brass maple leaf pin sat beneath her name tag. I had given it to her that morning with one rule. Don't explain it to anyone unless you choose to. Olivia had asked what it meant. I don't know all of it yet. I know Denise is afraid of it. Olivia pinned it on with shaking fingers. Then she can see it. Blake no longer spoke to me like a problem employee. He spoke as though I were a grieving daughter who needed help accepting change. Nobody is asking you to give up Ruth's legacy, he said warmly enough for the room to hear. We're asking you to carry her spirit forward. A few guests nodded. They did not know Ruth's spirit had already been reduced to a brand packet. They did not know Blake had marked half the menu as wasteful. They saw a tired daughter being invited to smile. Denise held the microphone toward me. Tell everyone we're one family. That's all. The threat beneath her softness was clear. If I refused, I became bitter. If I agreed, I gave them the one thing they lacked: consent. Dad looked at me, silently asking me not to make the room uncomfortable. He knew the room had been built to trap me, and still wanted me to make it painless. I took the microphone but did not speak into it. Denise noticed the pin on Olivia's apron. Her hand tightened around the cord. Blake saw her reaction. For the first time, I saw his weakness. He understood debt, layouts, and rescue language, but he did not understand the private history of the place he was trying to control. I handed the microphone back. Not before they eat. If this is about Ruth, they should taste Ruth's food first. Blake laughed. We already approved the tasting menu. You approved pastries from a supplier. My mother fed people meals. The room shifted. Henry set Ruth's old soup pot on the counter. The heavy one Blake wanted removed because it photographed badly and took too long to scrub. Maria carried out bowls. Olivia began placing spoons. Nobody asked Denise for permission. Denise recovered quickly. This is sweet. Lena is very attached to the old recipes. She smiled at the guests. Of course, attachment is not the same as leadership. A woman at table 3 lowered her spoon. An older man near the window stopped whispering to Blake. Denise thought she had made me look emotional. Instead, she had told the room she did not understand what leadership looked like in a kitchen. Henry filled the first bowl and placed it in front of a silver-haired woman with a cane hooked over her chair. I recognized her from the Saturday rush but had never known her name. She took one spoonful, then looked directly at the pin on Olivia's apron. Where did you get that? Denise answered too quickly. It was Ruth's. We're honoring her today. The woman ignored Denise and looked at me. That wasn't for honoring. Ruth wore that leaf when she meant no. The room went still. What do you mean? She touched the bowl as if the soup had pulled her backward in time. Your mother wore it whenever someone tried to make her cheap in this place. A banker, a landlord. Your father's cousin with that frozen pie scheme. She'd pin it on, stand behind the counter and say, "No one eats my fear for breakfast." A few people laughed softly because the sentence sounded like Ruth. For years I had thought calm meant swallowing the no before it reached my mouth. My mother had been calm because she had already chosen hers. Dad stepped forward. Gail? This isn't the time. So her name was Gail. And Dad knew exactly who she was. Gail's face hardened. Arthur, if this room is being asked to buy Ruth's story, this is exactly the time. Blake used his consultant voice. We appreciate community memories, but today is about current viability. Gail turned her spoon toward him. Current viability is standing in your kitchen. Her name is Lena. Denise put a hand on Dad's arm. Arthur, stop this. She was not afraid Gail would embarrass her. She was afraid Dad would panic and reveal too much. Why does Gail know something about Mom's agreement that you never told me? I asked. Dad rubbed both hands over his face. Denise said his name again, sharper this time. Olivia stepped away from her mother and stood beside me. The movement was small, but it broke the picture Denise had created. Dad's answer came out rough. Ruth and I signed a partnership amendment after the flood. She made me promise that no controlling share, name, recipe license, or secured asset would be transferred without her approval. If she died, her interest and approval rights were supposed to pass into a trust for you. The room seemed to narrow. Supposed to? His eyes dropped. I never completed the final transfer after you turned 30. Blake closed his eyes for 1 second. Denise's mouth opened, but no words came out. This was no longer a sentimental promise. There had been paperwork. There might still be paperwork. My father had hidden it because telling me would have placed me at the table. Gail pushed her bowl away. Ruth did not leave that girl only a memory. She left her a line nobody was supposed to cross. Blake stood. His chair scraped across the floor. If Lena wants to make this adversarial, we discuss the overdue bridge loan, missed vendor payments, and the bank's right to freeze the operating account. Dad whispered, Blake, don't. Blake no longer sounded warm. You asked me to stop the bleeding. I have the authority Arthur signed. If this cafe continues spending outside the approved plan, I can begin enforcement tomorrow morning. Denise lifted the microphone. Everyone, please enjoy the tasting while we handle a private family matter. I looked at the guests, the staff, Olivia, and the pin above her heart. No, you wanted my blessing in public. You can bring the threat in public too. Blake leaned toward the microphone without touching it. Fine. By breakfast, Red Maple can either follow the rescue plan or operate without credit, protected accounts, or guaranteed deliveries. Then everyone in this room can decide whether Lena's feelings pay wages. The threat remained in the air after Blake sat down. Dead had sounded distant while Dad whispered about it in storage. Blake had just given it a clock. Henry came out of the kitchen with a towel in one hand. Somebody already told Pete not to unload unless Blake cleared it. Dad turned toward Blake. You said the vendor hold was automatic. I am controlling the supply chain, Blake said. If Lena keeps buying as though nothing changed, you lose the building. Give me 2 weeks of clean numbers and I can protect the loan. He made clean sound as though I were dirt. Did you tell Olivia what being placed on paper meant? I asked Dad. He rubbed his forehead. That was answer enough. Olivia touched the brass pin as if it had grown hot. Denise reached for her wrist. Don't let Lena pull you into this. Your father and I protected you from the mess. Olivia pulled away. Protected me from what? Gail stood slowly. From Ruth's rule. When that leaf came out, nobody changed a supplier, recipe, sign, lock, or ownership document unless Ruth said yes in the room. She started it after Blake's uncle tried to buy the cafe through Arthur while Ruth was at the hospital with Lena. I remembered being 8 years old with pneumonia. Ruth sleeping upright in a plastic chair beside my bed. I had never known that while she sat there, someone had tried to use her absence to take the cafe. Dad closed his eyes. Blake cut across Gail. That has nothing to do with today. It has everything to do with today, Gail said. Different folder, same back door. Blake slapped his palm against the counter. 2 customers near the entrance stepped back. Today the account is short. Today Arthur gave me emergency authority. Today Lena is risking every employee's job because she wants a childhood shrine. Maria came out, wiping flour from her hands. My job is already at risk if you change the food and keep the name. People trust what leaves that kitchen. Blake's expression cooled. Then perhaps the kitchen needs people who understand survival. That was his mistake. He had finally threatened someone the room loved for doing the work that kept it alive. Henry stepped beside Maria. 2 servers moved closer to the counter. Even Dad saw the shift. Blake had spoken as if the cafe were a sick body, and he were the surgeon. Now he looked like a man holding a knife over people who still had names. I untied Olivia's red apron at the waist and removed my black one. You do not have to carry a plan nobody explained to you. Denise snapped. Don't make her choose. Olivia looked at Blake. Were you putting me on the new company because I mattered, or because my last name made the takeover look gentler? Both can be true. The answer came too quickly. Olivia stepped back as if he had shoved her. Pete appeared in the doorway carrying 2 bread trays against his hip. He had heard enough from the sidewalk. I'm not unloading under Blake's hold. Blake turned. This is a private account issue. Pete looked past him at me, and then at the maple leaf on Olivia's apron. Ruth told my father something after the flood. If the leaf is out, don't accept backdoor instructions. Not from husbands, bankers, or men in polished shoes. He set the trays on the nearest table. I'll put today on my own route tab. After that, somebody honest calls me. Blake's face went flat. Dad looked smaller than I had ever seen him, not because he had lost power, but because people were showing him where he had borrowed it. I held my hand toward Olivia. I did not ask for the pin. I waited. She unfastened it herself. For one terrible second, I thought fear might send it back to Denise. Instead, Olivia pressed it into my palm. It was never mine to wear over Ruth's apron. I pinned it to my black apron. My fingers did not shake until the clasp clicked shut. Blake leaned across the counter. You think a pin and a bread driver fix this? No. Good. Because tonight Arthur and I inventory every secured asset in this building. If you want to say, be here when we count what Ruth left behind. Dad flinched at the word left. Denise went pale. That told me they both knew there was something in the cafe that had not yet been counted. Blake began with Ruth's soup pot. Load it out back, he told Henry, before Lena turns grief into a business plan. The whole cafe went still. He had stopped pretending the pot was history and started treating it like property. I stepped between him and the counter. Touch it, and explain why the man claiming to save Ruth's cafe is stripping her kitchen while customers are still eating. Blake smiled as if he had been waiting for me to sound emotional. That pot is listed as an asset. He turned to Dad. Arthur, tell your daughter what you signed. Dad's face looked tired and cornered. I signed for Blake to review operations. Say it clearly. Dad swallowed. I signed a bridge loan agreement allowing his company to control certain payments and take possession of secured equipment after default. A few customers looked down at their bowls, not because they blamed me, because they understood what Blake had saved for the moment I resisted. He did not need to prove he owned the cafe. He only needed everyone to believe it was too sick to fight for. Your mother left a kitchen full of memories and a pile of bills, Blake said. I brought math. Gail rose from her table. You brought the same math your uncle brought after the flood. Blake's jaw tightened. Ruth wore that leaf when your family tried to buy her out, Gail continued. You were young, but you remember. She made every supplier answer to her face. No private pressure. No instructions through Arthur. That was 30 years ago. Then stop acting as if you invented the knife. Blake turned away from Gail and addressed the staff. Henry Maria, you have wages due Friday. Ask Lena whether Sentiment pays payroll. He looked at the tables. Ask these people whether they want to watch a cafe die because one daughter cannot admit her mother was human. That hurt because it used the truth as a weapon. Ruth had been human. She had missed payments, hidden pain, and left me a burning building with instructions I had never been allowed to read. I took the soup ladle from Maria and placed it on the counter. Henry, how many quarts are left? Enough for 40 cups. Maria, bread? She glanced at Pete. Enough if he unloads. Pete shoved open the front door and called to his helper. Bring the trays. Blake barked his name. Pete did not turn. You told me not to unload unless you cleared it. I'm clearing it with the woman wearing Ruth's no. Blake's control cracked because a man with flour on his sleeves had chosen whose voice he trusted. Denise saw it and went after the softer target. Olivia, do not throw away your future over Lena's tantrum. We promised you a management track, tuition help, and a real place in the new concept. You wanted to matter here. Olivia looked at me. The shame on her face revealed the missing piece. She had not only been used for optics, she had needed what Denise offered. She had worn the apron because it made her visible in a room where I had seen only my own loss. You told me Ruth wanted a younger face, Olivia said. She wanted the cafe to survive. No. You told me Lena was too bitter to share it. You said if I stood beside Blake, I could earn what Ruth never gave me. Dad flinched. So did I. Denise had found another woman hungry for belonging and arranged us as rivals for scraps. I wanted the job, Olivia said. I wanted help with tuition. But I did not agree to erase Lena. Nobody erased anyone, Blake said. We updated a failing brand. Gail laughed once. Ruth was not a brand when she fed your aunt on credit. And that, Blake said, turning on her, is why places like this die. Too much mercy, no discipline. He hated that Ruth's weakness had become loyalty. He hated that the people he considered liabilities were standing between him and the stove. Dad stepped forward. Blake came to me after our second bad month, he said. He offered enough money to keep the bank from calling the equipment loan. I thought I was buying time. You were, Blake said. Dad shook his head. I was buying silence, yours and mine. I didn't tell Lena because I knew Ruth wanted her at the table, and I was afraid she would say no. He looked at me. Ruth wrote it inside the register drawer because she knew I would lose both papers and courage. Lena gets a say before any sale. I read it every night and still let him stand here. His admission did not repair anything. It placed him on the correct side of the wound without asking me to comfort him. Blake reached toward the register. I placed my palm flat on top of it. No. You do not have authority. Maybe not enough yet. But you do not have obedience anymore. I looked at Dad. Can you revoke his emergency authority? Not without triggering default, Blake answered. Dad looked at Blake, the staff, and the trays Pete's helper was carrying through the front door. Then trigger it in my name. Blake became dangerous in a quieter way. He took out his phone and made one short call. Begin enforcement in the morning. Freeze the operating account if they continue outside the plan and prepare the possession notice for secured equipment. He ended the call. Serve soup tonight if it makes you feel like Ruth. Tomorrow you explain why the wages bounce. Fear moved through me so hard I almost stepped back. Olivia reached under the counter and pulled out the handwritten meal tickets we used when the register failed. Ruth made me practice with these, she said. Cash service, names on tickets, no account until morning. Henry nodded. Maria began cutting bread. Gail opened her purse and placed a 20 on the counter. Not a donation. Payment. The room understood. Chairs scraped. People reached for wallets. Blake had threatened tomorrow, and the cafe answered by making tonight real. Dad pulled at the stuck register drawer. It opened with a crack. On the inside wood, beneath old tape and coffee stains, Ruth's handwriting remained visible. Lena gets a say before any sale. Below it, scratched into the wood in smaller letters, were 3 words I had never noticed. Leaf. Flower. Lowest. Henry and I looked at each other. We moved the lowest flour sack. Beneath the shelf was a steel lockbox bolted to the floor. Dad reached behind the drawer lining and removed a small brass key. Ruth told me not to touch this unless the leaf came back to the counter and the cafe was being taken through fear, he said. I convinced myself that day would never come. He placed the key in my palm. Blake stared at it, and for the first time since he entered Red Maple, he had no sentence ready. The brass key opened the lockbox while Blake's voicemail played through the cafe speakers, warning that by breakfast we would have no protected account, no approved credit, and no choice but him. The box contained 8 brown envelopes in Ruth's handwriting. Bread, eggs, produce, wages, coffee, rent, emergency, and open anyway. The last one made Gail cover her mouth. It was not enough money to erase the debt. Ruth had kept enough to protect one morning the amount of time she believed a frightened person needed to stop making permanent decisions. Beneath the envelopes lay supplier names written in pencil, blank meal tickets, a sealed packet marked Lena, and one folded note. I opened the note first. If Arthur panics, do not let his fear become the price of this place. Dad made a sound as though he had been struck. I did not stop to comfort him. That was new for me. I paid Pete from the bread envelope, gave Maria the produce cash, and told Henry to write tomorrow's soup on the board large enough to read from the sidewalk. Blake could freeze an account. He could not freeze a loaf already purchased, a pot already heating, or a room full of people who knew whose kitchen they were standing in. Then I opened the packet bearing my name. Inside was a notarized copy of Ruth and Dad's partnership amendment, a trust certificate, and a letter from the attorney who had prepared them. Ruth's 49% interest had been placed in trust for me until my 30th birthday. Any transfer of a controlling share, use of the Red Maple name, or sale of secured kitchen assets required approval from both partners or their legal successors. I had turned 32 years earlier. Dad had never completed the transfer, but the documents had not expired. The ownership interest was mine. The filing had been delayed, not erased. Blake read the first page over my shoulder. A copy in a flower box does not stop enforcement. No, Gail said. But the attorney whose name is at the bottom might. By 5:30 the next morning, Pete was unloading at the front curb instead of the alley, where everyone could see him. At 6, Denise arrived with Olivia, and a smile that tried to look concerned. She saw the bread, cash tickets, and maple pin on my apron. Lena, this is emotional, but it is not sustainable. Then she turned to Olivia. Get your things. We are not attaching your future to a sinking kitchen. Olivia looked at the apron hook and then at me. She was pale, but her voice held. My future is not your receipt. Denise blinked. It was the first clean crack I had seen in her. Olivia took an envelope from her backpack and placed it beside the register. Denise told me this was petty cash for the transition. It is the staff tip reserve. She did not ask me to forgive her in front of everyone. She simply returned what she had been used to take. Maria put the envelope in the drawer. Wash your hands. We need someone on coffee. Olivia did. Blake arrived at 6:40 carrying a folder. He stopped when he saw Pete's bread and the handwritten tickets moving from hand to hand. Then he smiled at the customers. Good, you opened. That makes the transition easier. He looked at Dad. I need the owner at the bank in 20 minutes. Dad did not move. Arthur, do not let your daughter turn grief into a business decision. Dad reached into his pocket. For 1 second, I thought he would produce Blake's office key. Instead, he placed Blake's company card on the counter. I signed because I was scared. I thought if someone else took over, I would not have to admit I failed Ruth before she died. He pushed the card forward. I am not going to the bank with you. Blake looked around the room and realized his clean story no longer had a clean place to live. You still owe, he said. Soup and feelings do not erase debt. I placed the emergency envelope beside the register. Debt gets paid. Control does not get handed over with it. His voice dropped. You have no idea how ugly I can make this. I believed him. That was why I did not answer like someone trying to win an argument. I wrote 1 bowl of soup on a blank order ticket and placed it between us. Then start with breakfast. Pay for what you take or leave. The rule was simple enough for everyone to understand. In Ruth's cafe, nobody took without paying. Not even a man carrying a folder. Blake picked up his company card, but Dad placed one hand over it. That was issued in my name. It stays. Blake's jaw tightened. He left without buying breakfast. Denise followed him, but he did not hold the door for her. The morning did not become a miracle. The bank still called. A lawyer still sent a letter full of expensive words. Blake's company demanded repayment of the bridge loan and attempted to claim the oven, refrigerator, and soup pot as secured property. But the cafe did not close. Dad went to the bank with me and Ruth's documents. The bank's attorney confirmed the trust, froze any attempted ownership transfer, and separated the legitimate equipment debt from the conditions Blake had attached to his private loan. We received an 18-month repayment plan we could name out loud. It was painful, but it was real. The The first paper Dad brought me without hiding it was the bank's written confirmation that Ruth's 49% share belonged to me. The second was a resignation, removing him as sole operating manager. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "Good." He nodded. For once, he did not ask me to soften the answer. Over the next 8 weeks, we cut hours without cutting people, reduced the menu without removing Ruth's food, and held 2 cash dinners that sold out. Henry trained a younger cook instead of pretending his knee would last forever. Maria took over front-of-house scheduling. Olivia worked 2 mornings a week and enrolled in a local business course, using wages she earned rather than a future Denise promised. Blake's lawyers continued to threaten us, but the threat changed once they knew I had counsel, ownership, and records. His family's holding company accepted a repayment settlement rather than explain in court why its emergency investment required placing his fiancé's name over mine. Olivia did not cancel the wedding immediately. That was the part people later judged most harshly because they wanted courage to arrive all at once. It did not. Blake apologized in private, blamed stress, and said the cafe dispute had nothing to do with their marriage. Denise told Olivia canceling would humiliate the family and waste deposits. Dad said almost nothing because silence was still the habit he reached for first. Olivia asked me to keep the rehearsal dinner booking. "The cafe needs the money," she said, "and I need to see what they do when everybody is watching." I agreed on 3 conditions. The menu remained mine, no ownership announcement would be made, and Blake's family would pay the full deposit before service. All 3 conditions were written down. That brought us back to the night Denise raised her glass in front of 60 wedding guests. The dining room was full. Ruth's winter soup had been replaced by plated chicken, maple carrots, and the pie Denise once called too old-fashioned for a wedding. Olivia sat beside Blake, wearing no apron and very little expression. Dad sat beside Denise with a folded card in his hand. I was wearing Ruth's blue apron for the first time since the tasting. The brass leaf rested above the crooked stitched maple. Denise stood for the final toast. "When I met Arthur, Lena was already there," she said. "She was our little practice daughter. She taught us everything we needed to know before we got it right with Olivia." Several guests laughed because they thought the sentence was affectionate. Dad smiled weakly, as if the joke were harmless. Then he stood and read from the card Denise had placed beside his plate. "And as our wedding gift, I intend to transfer my remaining share of Red Maple Café to Olivia and Blake so they can carry the family legacy forward." The room applauded. Dad looked at me only after the words had left his mouth. He knew the announcement violated every agreement we had made. Denise knew it too. She was counting on the audience to make my silence cheaper than resistance. I untied Ruth's blue apron, laid it across the dessert table, and placed the brass pin on top. Every server stopped moving. Henry turned off the grill. Maria lowered the tray in her hands. The kitchen doors remained open, but no plate crossed them. Denise's smile disappeared. "What are you doing?" she whispered. I faced the room. "I'm making sure nobody mistakes unpaid labor for a wedding gift." Blake rose. "This is not the time." "You chose the time." Dad stared at the card in his hand. "Lena." I didn't know she had changed the wording. "You read it." That stopped him. Fear had written many of my father's excuses. His mouth had still spoken them. Blake addressed the guests. "There is a complicated ownership dispute being handled privately." "There is no ownership dispute." I took the bank confirmation and partnership amendment from beneath the dessert table. "I own 49% of Red Maple. The partnership agreement requires my written consent before Arthur's controlling share can be transferred, pledged, or gifted." I did not consent. A man at Blake's family table stood. "This is inappropriate." So was using a wedding to announce an invalid transfer. Denise tried to laugh. "Lena has always needed everything to be about her." Olivia stood. "No," she said. "You made everything about Lena while pretending she was invisible." Denise's face changed. "Sit down." Olivia removed her engagement ring. Blake did not look shocked. He looked angry that the timing belonged to someone else. "Olivia, don't be dramatic. You put my name on a company I did not understand. You used our wedding to make your loan look like family continuity. And when Lena resisted, you threatened the wages of people I grew up with. I was saving the cafe. You were buying it through me." She placed the ring beside his untouched dessert. "I will not marry a man who needs my name to take my sister's work." Nobody laughed now. Denise reached for Olivia, but she stepped away. Dad looked from one daughter to the other. His shoulders dropped as if he had finally understood there was no sentence left that could make everyone comfortable. He tore Denise's card in half. My share is not a wedding gift, he said. Not to Olivia, not to Blake. I had no right to announce it without Lena's consent. Denise stared at him. After everything I did for this family? Dad looked at the blue apron on the table. That is the sentence I used whenever I wanted Lena to pay for my fear. It was not a grand apology. It was the first honest one. The servers remained still until I looked at Maria and nodded. Finished serving the guests who already paid. The kitchen moved again. Not for Denise, not for Blake. For the customers, the staff, and the work itself. Blake left before dessert. His family followed in groups, whispering as though volume could change what they had witnessed. Denise remained long enough to tell Dad he had humiliated her, then walked out through the same door without waiting for him. Olivia sat at the end of the counter with her wedding makeup still on, and asked Henry whether he needed help stacking bowls. He handed her a towel. Start with drying. 3 months later, the cafe was still in debt. Henry's knee still hurt. The freezer still made a sound like an old truck whenever it started. Dad and I still could not speak for 10 minutes without touching something sharp between us. But every bill was visible. Every ownership paper carried the correct name. Dad worked 3 scheduled shifts, and no longer called favors fatherhood. Olivia earned her hours. And when she made a bad suggestion, Maria corrected her without anyone calling it betrayal. We framed Ruth's partnership amendment and hung it inside the office, not in the dining room. The cafe did not need another piece of history turned into decoration. The blue apron returned to its brass hook. I kept the maple pin attached to my black work apron, close enough to reach but no longer heavy enough to control me. One morning, Dad stood beside the register and asked, "What do you think we should do about the summer menu?" Not, "Can you handle it?" Not, "Be my steady girl." Not, "Don't make this difficult." He asked what I thought. I looked through the kitchen doors at Henry, Maria, Olivia, and a row of customers waiting for breakfast. Then I answered without lowering my voice. We decide together, in the room. Before anyone signs anything. The brass maple leaf caught the morning light, and nobody mistook my no for grief again.